Am I the butthole for getting my neighbor's car towed? I recently bought a house and moved in. The previous owner rented the house out to students and transformed a big part of the front yard into a parking place. My front yard is basically just 4 parking spaces. I live alone and basically only use one of the parking spaces. But while the painters, handymen, and gardeners for the backyard were there, they used the other parking spaces during the day, because the nearest community parking spaces are half a kilometer from my house, so about a 5-minute walk. When they were done and I moved in, my elderly neighbor, who cannot walk without a cane, asked if she could continue the deal she made with the previous owner. She showed me the contract she made with the previous owner that states that she can use it in exchange for a home-cooked meal once a month. I told her she didn't have to give me anything as I understood her situation, but she insisted. So I signed the contract to let her use the space closest to her house. This went well for a couple of months before another house in the street was sold and the new neighbors asked if their handymen and painters could use the parking places until they were done, as it was not handy to make them walk all the way to and from their truck. It is not allowed to park on the street in my street. I told them it was fine, but only the handymen and painters can use the spaces. When they are done, I don't want others. I did not make a deal with using my parking spaces, as I like to keep the spaces clear for my girlfriend, friends and family when they are allowed to visit again. Fast forward a month and the handymen and painters are finished with the house and the new neighbors started using the spaces. I told them this wasn't what we discussed and that they had to leave. They told me that the spaces are community spaces and she and her husband could use them, as I didn't need 4 spaces for myself. I told her to move the cars or I had them towed. They moved the cars and didn't use the spaces anymore for a week. As soon as she parked her car there, again, I immediately called the tow company and half an hour later her car got towed. The next day she came up to me asking me why her car went. I told her I had it towed, because she parked in my front yard. My friends tell me I am being a petty butthole for having her car towed and should apologize. My girlfriend tells me I did the right thing as they would have probably claimed my entire front yard as their personal parking places if I didn't make a point out of it. So am I the butthole here? Not the butthole. It's absurd of her to claim that your private property is community space. She's acting very entitled and you did the right thing by having her towed. Hell, if anything happened to her car and it got scratched, she could sue you. You should probably put up a sign, though. Parking only with explicit permission from the owner. All others will be towed. Maybe a camera too, just to make sure they don't try anything. Original poster replies. That's actually a pretty good suggestion. I will look into having a sign made. Thanks. They are readily. Web link. The second picture for that is hilarious. User Quixotic Logophile. Get the second picture of that sign on a big cardboard cutout and have it stood there. Really, freak the neighbors out. Reddit link. No, hire the guy to stand there with his sign and his smile. That's the elite package, mine was the budget option. Super deluxe edition would be to have the guy holding that sign and a pic of original poster's house on a map standing in neighbor's front garden. Ultra edition is that he does cartwheels whenever the neighbors even look at him. And have him stare at the neighbors' windows all the time. I personally wouldn't mind if that guy stared at me with that smile like sunshine. Just saying. If they're really big, NIMBY types, a picture of a black guy will really get them upset laughing out loud. That my hope. I want that job. That smile. I needed a giggle, thank you. Person for scale. Happy man for scale. He's way too happy to be holding that sign. Looks like someone excited to put up the sign and start towing people. He owns the local tow company. You like that too? Okay, go back to the page, choose the reflective aluminum sign, and below that check the 24 by 30 box. It's the same guy holding an even larger sign. 10/10 would recommend. I don't know why that's so funny, but it is. His smile is perfect. Slightly petty but happy. Yes, it is. His face says you know that you want it, buy the sign. This, curved up arrow, you can also contact a tow company that you want to use and get a little sign with their information to attach so people know where to call when their car is gone and not bother you. The towing company that a lot of people use in my area actually gives out the signs with their number on it for free to potential clients since they want property owners to use their service. Oh, they'll still bother him. Then you can just speculate out loud whether they learn to read or not as you close the door in their face. Tow companies round me will give these out free as long as you use their service. Wouldn't want to be towed by then they charge a fortune to get your car back? Yeah, but you know the kind of buttholes who do crap like this just love to abide by written instructions. The buttholes who illegally dump on my right-of-way go out of their way to cut down the signs I have posted on the fence. And since I had them up there with industrial wire ties, they must be feeling extra spiteful, because you can't really remove those readily without wire cutters or pliers. That's fair, but what the other person said about potentially getting sued is possible. And if there is posted notice, liability for the vehicle is no longer their problem, so it does still eliminate that risk. If I were you, I'd put the sign back up with the industrial strength wire and point a camera in that direction. If or when they tamper with your sign again, you'll have video evidence and can sue them in small claims court to reimburse you. Rinse and repeat. Original poster. Note that there are 4 different sizes of the sign. The link took me to the smallest one, 10 by 14. They should splurge for the 24 by 30. I love how they have a guy happily holding one up with a huge grin as one of the pics. If you do get a sign, please make sure the nice elderly neighbor with the agreement knows the sign isn't directed at her. Except that neighbor does have explicit permission from the owner. It's still a good idea to say something. Someone as courteous as that neighbor sounds might err on the side of caution and not want to bother original poster. Make her a parking pass. Or a sign for her spot. The solution to this is to put signs up in front of 2 of the spaces, so the elderly neighbor can park in hers without issue. And a reserved for, nice neighbor lady, sign for her space, as the buttholes will park in her space. Careful with the signs, check to see if you need a permit to post them. Check to see if you need to reference a specific ordinance, I do in my city. Check to see if they need to be a specific minimum size. Mine need to be in my city. That seems so strange if it applies to private property. But I've dealt with ridiculous ordinances, so I shouldn't be surprised. The minimum size makes sense. I'm sure someone successfully sued saying that the sign's lettering was a 64th of an inch too small and therefore they couldn't read it when they parked. Okay. Maybe it doesn't make sense, but I can understand why a city would do that. I didn't even think about that. Makes sense when you put it like that. Yeah, but isn't the sign really just a courtesy? You shouldn't need a sign to be able to have someone towed off your property. Sometimes private property is not always readily apparent. Not saying this is the case here, but for example, I've come across parking spaces that seemed like they were public, right on the edge of the street, but had actually been made on private property that abutted the street. My dad had some neighbors try to pull some crap like that where they were obligated to notify him of certain changes they were making to trees/bushes in front of his house, and they put up the smallest sign possible on a tree without telling anyone. Some guy's 10-foot tall sign 50 years ago, help me F big titty whales. The city 50 years ago, I can't believe we need a sign ordinance that applies to private property. He could be dealing with an HOA as well. It sounds like a private street. Considering their front lawn was zoned as a parking area, the regulations are probably pretty loose. You would think so, but I have to follow the city ordinances to have a parking sign on my driveway. If the sign doesn't meet the size requirements, the police won't approve the tow truck to tow the car. That is why I said to check. A friend of mine put up a sign on the side of her house saying, "Private parking. Any unauthorized vehicles will be towed and sold to Poland for scrap money." Nobody parked in her spot again. What country was this in? And if I post a similar sign in Texas, should I use Louisiana, Arkansas, or Oklahoma as the state to sell the car to? Oklahoma. Nothing else could be so insulting. You've clearly never been to Ohio. I would just put private property, all others will be towed signs up. If you put one about having permission, that could leave legal wiggle room. They could claim you said they could and it would become your word against theirs if cops are called. Just let the elderly neighbor know that your deal still stands and that they signs don't apply to her. Or what a friend did, it said, with parking only with written permission from the owner. Towing companies often provide a sign in exchange for having the tow rights. They'll also have their contact info so you can avoid interacting with the dumb ones. You seem like a good neighbor who wants to help others. I am sorry it backfired. I just want to add on that the elderly neighbor is adorable, wanting to pay for her parking with a meal. So sweet. Original poster to let them continue parking there. Not the butthole. I'm thinking it's also nice social time for the neighbor once a month. Maybe they eat together, I'm not sure. It's like the wedding singer where she pays him in meatballs. Hold out your hands. Laughing out loud. This right here would make him not the butthole looking out for the elderly neighbor. I was scared for a minute he said no to her. But the new neighbors are entitled and there is no reason to park there, it's private property. What asshats. Right? Adorable. Yes. I want to know what they make. I imagine meatballs for his pocket like the old lady on Wedding Singers. You have to try one in front of her, too, so she can see you enjoying it. That's my favorite part. Not the butthole. It's absurd of her to claim that your private property is community space. Original poster: go park in her front yard. Picnic in their garden. Community space. Donuts in the rear yard. Community space. Neighborhood barbecue. Woo-woo. Did someone say pool party in the neighbor's front yard? Hell, if anything happened to her car and it got scratched, she could sue you. Well, lawsuits happen all the time, but it would probably be a pretty weak one. If you are parked in front of my house, and my tree falls on your car, unless you can prove that I was negligent and it was obviously going to fall and I didn't do anything about it, it would not be my liability. I would be more worried about them falling while on my property. But I do agree that the neighbor can kick rocks. Original poster gave them fair warning that they choose to ignore. Absolutely not the butthole. I would add written permission of owner. This is good, but I would specify explicit written permission. Not the butthole. You warned them what would happen and they did it anyway. I don't understand why they would need to park there, and I don't think you have any moral obligation to let them slide. Plus, them trying to claim it as community parking, despite said parking being in your yard, is just ridiculous. Original poster replies. They probably need to park there because a 5-minute walk would be the end of the world. That's a want though, not a need. They want to not walk 5 minutes. But unlike your elderly neighbor, who both probably has a harder time with mobility, and who had an agreement with the previous house owner, they chose to move into a house knowing what the parking situation was like. If they can't walk the 5 minutes, then they should have moved somewhere else. Sometimes neighborhoods develop around people who both are unable to deal with the changes, and don't have the means to move. But these people moved into this situation, it's on them. Elderly neighbor also asked first and put an agreement in writing, which is a big difference. And insisted on paying him with food, which is so sweet. And respectful of original poster's private space. Seriously. I want to be her neighbor, she sounds like a gem. Not the butthole. Original poster, they're your spots. And I bet her cooking is great too, since the previous owner thought to use it for that deal, unless she suggested it, but still. She probably suggested it. A lot of people don't like anything that can be perceived as a handout. This gives her something she can do so she doesn't feel like she is being a burden. Plus, he was already very generous, letting their painters and such use the spaces. Give an inch, man. I know. Way to take advantage of his kindness. You almost wonder if they were looking at the house, raised concerns about parking, and some dip crap was like, oh, don't worry, that house across the street has extra spaces and they let people park there all the time. It's basically a little community lot at this point. Very true, but that's also a simple thing to verify beforehand. Don't take a salesman at their word. So much this right here. Sales are there to close the deal. Some of their information is made up on the spot, like 69% of most statistics. Exactly. We are house hunting, and require 2 parking spaces. It's been a nightmare. We found one place that was beautiful and would have been perfect, but the only parking was one spot out front and potentially one of us could use the parking lot at a community center, about a 5-minute walk. It made me so sad to walk away, but it just couldn't work. You have to be aware of what you require from the place you are buying/renting. There's a really good chance when they were buying the house they saw the parking and thought, oh, community parking, and maybe the realtor even said yes, looks like it. Not justifying it, of course, but they might have been under a false assumption/pretense. I assume there's nothing stopping them from transforming part of their yard for parking, although I wouldn't care if there was. It's quite common where I am for people to do this with a bit of gravel, or a couple of rows of bricks, since most of the houses were built without garages or driveways. You could have a swimming pool installed in your front yard and she wouldn't be entitled to use it. What does she think is so magical about a piece of tarmac? It is really common in neighborhoods in cities that were built before cars were common. Whole parts of my city are filled with houses that don't have garages and weren't designed for driveways. And the people illegally parking in ops yard should have considered that before moving to a place without a parking spot. They bought their house knowing they don't have parking in front of it. Too bad for them. And you were completely right for towing. You had an explicit discussion about it and then a week later she starts doing it again. You had to show her you were serious. Just to point something out here, your elderly neighbor insisting you take the meal, was possibly because that is one of the few chances she has at social interaction per month. Also, it gives her something to do for someone else, making her feel useful, and helps to keep her mental health up. My grandparents just gave up on life pretty much as soon as they didn't feel like they contributed anything anymore. Some people will take literally anything that is free. Other people completely shun the idea of taking a handout of any kind. So it might be the social interaction but also be a token gesture, so she's trading/bartering something of value and not using the spot for free. Don't they have a driveway or a garage? Maybe they should have thought about that before they got the place. I would suggest to say no to any handymen, etc. using your parking in the future. New neighbors just showed you how quickly people will become entitled and take advantage. Hard no for everyone except elderly neighbor and your guests. Original poster replies. Yeah, learned this the hard way now. They can renovate their yard and add parking spaces if they are that lazy. You warned them what would happen and they did it anyway. Get FKed, neighbor. Web link. Yep. Tried to be nice, gave them a warning, they called your bluff. They don't get to be mad when it turns out you weren't bluffing. Not the butthole. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to be the first to know about Red Rabbit Reader's new videos. If you like our videos, please like them on YouTube and share them with your friends. We welcome your comments below. Press to start another of our videos.